So we are just going to ask you a few questions about your service in the military. So first off, were you drafted or did you enlist voluntarily?
I enlisted voluntarily to avoid the draft.
Which war were you in?
Actually, the Korean War. I was in during the Korean War.
Okay. Um, so what did you do in the service?
I first of all, got in the service and went to a lot of schools because when you first go in the service, they give you IQ tests and find out what you're strong in, and then they give you this is what they did with me. They gave me a list of things that they would like me to do, and so I picked out aircraft mechanic,
Wow.
and, and I was an aircraft mechanic before that. So I went to several schools, and they were building the airplane that they were designing me for. They were still building the B-47, and so when they got the first B-47, I had already had 2.5 years of school
Wow.
for the aircraft.
So then you were in the Air Force.
I was in the Air Force, yes.
And so you're saying that they designed the plane alongside you, or?
No, the airplane was in the process of being designed from about 1947, and they actually didn't get a model flying until 1950, I think it was. And I joined the service in 51. They didn't have airplanes available, so so I worked on other airplanes and went to school until they got the airplanes serviceable. So we got the first B-47s.
Wow. So then you were one of the first ones to fly a B-47.
Yes,
Wow.
right.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
And what
we-
did you? Sorry, continue.
what's your question?
Yeah. What did you do in the airplane? Like, what was your job?
I was a crew chief. I was one of the first crew chiefs, and what we did is we took care of the airplane's maintenance and also instructed other mechanics how to handle this airplane because it was brand new, and it had a lot of idiosyncrasies that other airplanes didn't have.
Such as?
So, well, we had sophisticated radar, we had Doppler radar, we had sophisticated bombing sites, and we had special armament, and even starting up a jet, most people didn't know how to do that. In those days, they didn't have the sophisticated fuel controls to start the airplane or start the jet engine. Nowadays, all they got to do is throw on a switch and everything is automatic. But in those days, we had to nurse the airplane up to about 60% before we could turn it over to the pilot.
Wow.
And the pilots there were two pilots on the airplane, pilot and co-pilot, and then a bombardier, but he was also a rated pilot. So it was a three-man crew. And how I fit in is I was the crew chief and I was the one who took care of the airplane. So quite often I went with the airplane. I sat on what they call the step, which was an improvised seat that was in the airplane, the third seat.
Wow.
And so because the airplane was brand new, it had all the sophistication that they didn't want anybody to get. And so they didn't send us to Korea. We went to England,
Oh, wow.
and we flew around the England, or the there were three squadrons of us,
Mhm.
and each squadron had 30 airplanes. And so we had to keep 30 airplanes in the air. There were 90 airplanes total. We had to keep 30 airplanes in the air at all times, all loaded up, ready to go to a target.
So your airplanes then were bombers in Korea?
Well, they used conventional airplanes in Korea. That was still very conventional.
So what did the airplanes that you were in charge of do?
What did they do? They were bombers.
Oh, okay.
They were. We didn't have as much armament as most airplanes because at that time we were the fastest flying machine in the area.
Right.
So nobody could catch us. We only had two guns, two 50-millimeter cannons out the back of the airplane, and it was all done by radar control.
Wow.
So that's some of the stuff that I had to set up before they left each time. I'd set that up so they could pick a target, and if they decided to pick a target. But it was nice duty for me because I learned an awful lot.
Yeah. So it seems as though you may have been really fortunate to be in England and not actually in Korea. But how would you describe how the other soldiers felt about the war?
Well, most of us didn't like what we heard about. Though they were calling it a policing action, it wasn't a war. It was a policing action.
Right.
And the thing was, you couldn't respond unless somebody shot at you.
Right.
So it wasn't a fair war as far as most of us surmised.
Right.
So, but that was the first one that they did that. But now that's how the military operates. They put you at a disadvantage. I don't believe that most everyone thought that they were operating at a disadvantage.
That makes
But
sense.
that was just my opinion.
Do you know of a lot of soldiers who, I mean, yeah, a lot of, I guess you could say, soldiers in the policing action that didn't want to be in the war, or did most of them seem like they wanted to be there?
I don't think the ones being drafted, they were there because they were drafted.
Right.
I'm sure there was a lot of military people that it was a career for them, and so it's just another war. But most of the people we were defending our country as far as we were concerned.
Right.
See, the Korean War wasn't as big with me because we were in the Air Force, and what we were supposed to do is retaliate against a strike against the U.S. That's why we had to keep 30 airplanes all loaded up in the air, flying around Russia. We didn't go into Russia, we flew around Russia. And so that was our deterrent. It would keep the escalation of the Cold War.
Okay.
So most of us were too busy working on our job because our job was a 24-hour a day job,
Right.
and we all had our own little niche that we were. I had people working for me that were staff sergeants, and they knew all about radar much more than I did. I had armament people working for me that would work in the armament parts of the airplane. I was the authority on how the airplane was put together, how the fuel controls were supposed to work, how the engines were supposed to start, and how long I had to keep track of all these things about the airplane. And so when we came back to the United States, we would come back for 2 or 3 weeks, and it was really to replenish our supplies and to get ready to go back overseas again. And so, but we couldn't spend over 90 days in England because we had a treaty that said that we weren't supposed to station military weapons. No, atomic weapons. We couldn't take atomic weapons into England and be stationed there. So we went as what we call TDY, temporary duty.
Right.
So we could never spend over 90 days there.
That's
And then
interesting.
we'd go back to the States.
Okay. Would you say that the war, or not war efforts, but the policing action efforts that soldiers alongside you carried out, would you say that they were? Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot my question. Wait, it's down here. Okay, we will skip that question. Did the U.S. home front support military in Korea?
Did the what?
Did the home front in the United States support the military actions in Korea?
Oh, yes, yes. It wasn't until the Vietnam War that then the people started saying, why are we at war? When they realized then that we were just sending people over there to defend it.
Right.
We weren't even sure what we were defending. But we were esprit de corps. All of the people that I worked with and around, our object was to do the thing we were assigned and do it properly. So we were very, very much with the activity. We were going to do it right.
Yeah, that makes sense. How long were you in the service?
Exactly 4 years.
Was that how long you enlisted?
Yep.
That makes sense.
When I came up for discharge, they asked me if I would re-enlist, and I said no. The war was over. Korean War had ended. The Vietnam, they hadn't really started into that. They were just barely engaging it. And so I decided that I didn't want to stay in the military. I had too much to do with my life.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Good airline job.
Yeah. And the one thing the airline or the military experience gave me was when I went to the airlines to be a mechanic, they realized that I had all these special ops kind of things that I knew more about the airplanes and their own people. And the airplane that I had worked on was more sophisticated than anything they had even seen.
Right.
But we were getting these brand new jet airplanes at United Airlines, and so I was the guy that would write up the logbook, and they made me an inspector after 2 years there, which usually took a long time to be an inspector. And so what I would do is meet the airplanes as they came from the factory and go in and talk to the pilot and write up the problems with the possibility of problems and just take their instructions. You know that every airplane is different.
Yeah, of
There's
course.
no two airplanes that are the same. They may be a DC-8 or a DC-7 or a 720, but there's idiosyncrasies of each airplane. And so a lot of these things you had to note and make exceptions for. And that's where I fit in because I understood the new systems because all the airplanes had these sophisticated systems that the old airplanes didn't have. So that's how I excelled. I was very lucky to be at when I was there.
Okay. Do you have anything else you'd like to add about the Korean War or about your service?
Well, I think the military service is good for a young man. I don't think war is good for anybody, but the discipline and taking care of their own things and working with other people, you couldn't find a better place to learn that.
Okay.
and you were obligated to do a good job. So I think it's good for young people.
That makes sense. Natalie, do you have anything to ask?
No, not really.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Anything for you guys.